Hi, I'm Bree Johnson, and we're going to integrate two really simple cues into a half moon pose or Ardha Chandrasana. Now, a half moon pose is a great pose. I love it for many, many reasons. It feels, at the very least, just because it feels good and I enjoy doing it. But I especially enjoy it when I think about adding a sense of spaciousness in my hip joint for the standing leg, as well as thinking about more lightness, hip joint, and more strength from behind. So let's go into this. What you'll need is a block. I have two yoga blocks here. I'm just going to use one of them. I'm going to place it here in front of my foot. Now we're going to come into it with our toes. I'm going to start with my right foot, and my toes are going to point towards the block. And at first, I'm actually just going to stand a little bit with my knees slightly bent. Now, we may have the tendency with our knees bent to shift the weight forward. So even though your knee is bent, can you shift the weight more back into your heel? So you have to feel, there's this feeling of a little bit more shifting your butt back. So it feels like you're sticking your butt back, keeping that knee slightly bent, and then the leg that's in the air gets to stretch actively out behind you. Now keep feeling that ever so slight bend in your knee. Keep shifting your hips back so you feel like your pelvis is weighted over your heel. And then you're going to start to slowly lower down. So this is our before. We're just coming into it before like this. In fact, you know what? Sometimes even though that block is there, that doesn't mean you have to get to it. I've got a wall conveniently behind me that I'm using as well. So sometimes it's really nice actually just to do more of a floaty half moon like this. So I'm going to come out of that. When we were in that, I hope you were able to notice how your hip joint felt, because we're going to do the same position and think about coming into it so that we can keep that sense of spaciousness in the hip joint. So let's go again. You're going to bend your knees slightly, shift the hips back, and then before going anywhere, I'm going to invite a little bit of space. I'm going to get this feeling as if somebody just put a little puff of air in my hip joint, which by the way is a fabulous cue that a friend of mine gave or does, as has said, and I'm totally ripping that off right now. So thank you, Lindsay. So puff of air in your hip joint, keeping that sense of space. And then I'm going to only lower as slow as I can go or move in such a way that I'm keeping that puff of air in my hip joint. So this becomes a very slower, maybe more refined version. Maybe you don't quite go as far. Maybe the fingertips don't even touch the block, and that's fine. Back leg extending back. Keep that sense of puffing in your hip joint, that puff of air. Don't sink down into it. And then you can also keep your top arm on your hip. You can bring it up. You can go a little lower. But I find when I get to about here is where maybe I want to start collapsing into my hip joint. So I know I'm going to stay here and I'm going to breathe. And I'm going to enjoy that feeling of work in different areas than if I was just collapsing in the hip like that. So that's it. That's super simple. Keeping that ever so these are the cues that we want to focus on is spaciousness in the hip joint, keeping that sense of lightness there, and then shifting, always shifting the hips back so that you're moving the weight more over your heel. Your strong, wonderful heel bone is going to help hold you up, freeing up the front of your foot to respond to those little wobbles and wiggles that you will inevitably do in this pose. Play with that. In fact, I recommend playing with that sense of air, lightness, puff of air in your hip joint in many of your standing pose. So see how that is. Tell me, send me an email, write in the comments below. I love hearing from everybody. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up for my weekly newsletter as well so that you can get movement tips into your inbox every week and be inspired each week. So can't wait to see you, can't wait to hear from you, and see you next time.